Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring stood atop the windswept cliffs of Cap Blanc-Nez, the channel stretching before him like a silver barrier. Through his binoculars, the white cliffs of Dover glowed in the early light close enough to feel inevitable, yet far enough to mock him. 22 miles, that was all. 22 miles between the greatest air force ever assembled and the island it had sworn to crush. Behind him, his entourage waited in stiff silence, boots planted in the chalk-dusted grass, eyes fixed on their commander. The morning sun caught the metals covering his powder-blue uniform, each one a battle he had not fought, a victory he had claimed anyway. Only the restless tapping of his swagger stick betrayed what the smile could not. He lowered the binoculars and turned with theatrical precision, projecting absolute certainty into the wind. "Gentlemen," he declared, "the Luftwaffe will clear the RAF from the skies in 4 days. Fighter Command will cease to exist in 4 weeks. When the invasion barges cross, they will cross unchallenged." Heads nodded, some with genuine belief, others with the practiced diplomacy of men who had learned that disagreement was a luxury reserved for the doomed. None mentioned the intelligence reports sitting back at headquarters, reports suggesting British fighter strength was far healthier than Göring wanted to believe. None pointed out that the RAF had been fighting for 6 brutal weeks and showed no sign of breaking. Göring believed victory was inevitable. Therefore it was. That was August. By mid-September, the theory lay in pieces. Major Adolf Galland sat in a requisitioned chateau south of Calais, flight suit still damp from the afternoon sortie over Kent, hands that never trembled now struggling to light a cigarette. Across from him, Major Werner. Mulders traced arcs across a map of southern England, like a man trying to solve an equation that refused to balance. "We're losing veterans faster than we can replace them," Galland said quietly, exhaling smoke. Yesterday, Hauptmann Henschberger went down over the estuary, 6 kills. Today, von Wehrmacht bailed out near Manstein. Both irreplaceable. He tapped ash into a chipped porcelain tray. "And still they tell us the RAF is finished. That we've destroyed more Spitfires than Britain ever built. Yet every time we cross the channel..." He looked up, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. "There they are. Always more." Mulder set down his pencil. The map now covered in overlapping arcs, each one marking a mission that had cost them men they could unafford to lose. "The Reichsmarschall doesn't want reports," Mulder said. "He wants confirmation. He wants us to tell him his predictions came true." The telephone rang. Both men stared at it as if it were a bomb. Galland lifted the receiver, listened, and set it down with the care of a man handling something fragile. "Kesselring's staff," he said flatly. "We're summoned to Karen Hall. Göring wants to discuss our lack of aggressive spirit." Mulders closed his eyes. "Of course he does." Karen Hall, September 19, 1940. Göring's hunting estate sprawled north of Berlin like a monument to unchecked ego. In the great hall, beneath a life-size portrait of Göring dressed as a Renaissance prince, the Reichsmarschall sat enthroned in a chair that might as well have been gilded. His uniform sparkled in the afternoon light like stage costume. Arrayed before him stood the men who had actually fought the battle. Galland, Emders, Troutloft, Lutzow, Ozaw, Munchberg, aces, whose combined victories numbered in the hundreds. Men who smelled of cordite and sweat standing rigid, while Göring paced in boots that had never seen mud. "The Führer," Göring announced, "has postponed Operation Sealway." The word hung in the air. Postponed. Not cancelled, not abandoned, just delayed. As though the invasion were a dinner party pushed back by weather, not a strategic collapse. "This postponement," Göring continued, his voice hardening, "is necessary because the Luftwaffe has failed to achieve air superiority. You had every advantage, the finest aircraft. Numerical superiority. Clear objectives." He stopped pacing and turned to face them. "And yet the RAF remains. Why?" Silence pressed down like a physical weight. Finally, Galland spoke. "Reichsmarschall, the situation over England is not what intelligence suggested. The Spitfire outperforms the 109 above 20,000 feet. It turns tighter, climbs faster. The Hurricane absorbs damage like nothing we've encountered. Their pilots bail out over home territory and fly again the next day. Ours become prisoners." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "We were told Fighter Command had 300 aircraft left. Yesterday over London, we faced at least 20 fresh squadrons. They're not fighting like men on the edge of defeat." Galland's voice dropped. "They're fighting like they've already won. Because they are winning, Mulder said quietly. The words detonated in the silence. For a moment, no one breathed. No one moved. The statement hung there, impossible to recall, impossible to ignore. Grings stared at Mulders as though the major had committed treason. His face cycled through disbelief, rage, and something that looked almost like fear before settling into cold fury. That, Grings said slowly, is defeatist nonsense. The Luftwaffe does not lose battles. We crushed Poland in days. France in weeks. The problem is not our strategy or our aircraft. He jabbed a finger toward them. The problem is the fighting spirit of our pilots. The accusation landed like a slap. Then Gring turned to Galland and his voice became dangerously soft. Tell me, Major Galland, what would you require to perform your duties with the excellence expected of the Luftwaffe? Everyone in the room recognized the trap. Galland had 3 seconds to choose between safety and honesty. He smiled politely and said, a squadron of Spitfires, Reichsmarschall. The room froze. Gring's face turned the color of a fresh bruise. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, no sound emerging. For 5 seconds he stood there, trembling with a rage so complete it seemed to paralyze him. Then he turned on his heel and walked out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the portrait on the wall. No one spoke for a full minute. Finally, Troutloff exhaled and muttered, well, that's our careers finished. But Gring's tantrum was only the visible part of Germany's unraveling response. 30 miles away, in a commandeered manor house serving as temporary headquarters, Adolf Hitler was already rewriting the narrative. General Jodl sat across from the Führer, watching him gesture over maps with the manic energy of a man trying to rearrange history through force of will alone. The postponement order lay between them, a document of enormous consequence presented as routine. Paperwork. The invasion, Hitler said, was always conditional. We made that clear from the beginning. Air superiority was required. Without it, we adjust. Jodl kept his expression neutral. He had been present in July when Hitler called the invasion essential, the operation that would end the war in the West. He had watched millions of Reichsmarks pour into barges, fuel depots, staging areas. He had read the directives declaring Britain's defeat imminent. Now it was being swept aside with a single sentence. This is not a defeat, Hitler continued, pacing. It is a rational response to circumstances. The British are resilient more than anticipated, but they will break. We continue air operations through winter. By spring, their resolve will collapse. And if it does not? Jodl asked quietly. Hitler stopped. His answer came low and deliberate. Then we have more pressing concerns. The Soviet question cannot wait. Every month we delay, Stalin grows stronger. We secure the eastern frontier. Britain can be managed later. The meaning settled like ice in Jodl's chest. The pivot had already begun. Britain was no longer the decisive campaign. Russia was. Should I expand planning for eastern operations? Jodl asked, though he already knew. Preliminary planning began in July, Hitler replied with a thin smile. Expand it. I want a complete operational framework by December. Sea Lion was not being postponed. It was being erased. In the weeks that followed, the machinery of denial ground into motion. On October 12th, Hitler issued a directive. Sea Lion would be maintained as a deception measure only. Preparations were postponed until spring 1941, bureaucratic language for abandonment. On October 31st, the Luftwaffe launched its last major daylight raid. 21 aircraft lost. The next day, the strategy shifted to night bombing, the Blitz, a campaign that could be presented as intentional rather than born from failure. At Luftflotte 2 headquarters, Field Marshal Kesselring read the October assessments with a grim expression. The numbers told a story Berlin refused to hear. British aircraft production had risen during the battle. Fighter Command fielded more operational squadrons in November than in July. The exhausted RAF had shot down 47 German aircraft in the past week alone. We're fighting an enemy that grows stronger while we grow weaker, Kesselring told his staff. And we're reporting the opposite to Berlin because that's what they want to hear. No one contradicted him. By January 1941, the Luftwaffe's official internal assessment arrived 87 pages of careful misdirection. The conclusions were predictable. The operation had achieved qualified success. Air superiority had been partially established. The invasion had been postponed due to meteorological and logistical factors, and the RAF had demonstrated unexpected resilience. The words defeat and failure appeared nowhere. Pilots who had fought the battle read the document with bitter amusement. They had buried friends, watched comrades bail out over the channel, never to return, flown at the edge of their fuel range against an enemy that seemed endless. Now a report told them they had almost won. It was fiction disguised as analysis, but necessary fiction for a regime that could not admit error. So what did the German High Command say when they lost the Battle of Britain? They said nothing. Not the truth, not the lessons, not the reality their pilots had lived and died inside. Instead, they buried defeat under euphemism, disguised collapse as delay, replaced reflection with rationalization. The silence was more revealing than any admission could have been. For Britain, the opposite held true. Their victory needed no embellishment. The evidence lay in empty beaches, unused barges, bitter autumn storms rolling across a channel no invasion fleet would ever cross. They had survived. That was triumph enough. On September 20th, Churchill captured it in a single sentence. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. A line spoken not to conceal truth but to honor it. Germany marched toward 1941 carrying an unspoken defeat like ballast, heavy, hidden, growing heavier. The refusal to acknowledge failure in Britain was not the end of anything. It was the beginning of a pattern that would echo across the steppes of Russia, the deserts of North Africa, every front where reality collided with ideology. In the skies over Britain, the Luftwaffe learned it could be defeated. In the halls of Berlin, the High Command learned it could not admit it. And that second lesson, unspoken, unexamined, buried beneath medals and proclamations, would shape every disaster yet to come.